My dad used to say that the measure of a person was what they did with their hands, not in the way he meant it later, but in the original way. The honest way, the way his own father had said it to him before everything changed. I didn't know that for a long time. I only knew the version of my father that wore pressed slacks to the grocery store and corrected my grammar at the dinner table. My name is Cassidy. I'm a licensed electrician, and the night my brother announced his engagement at my uncle's house in front of 23 members of my extended family, my dad looked across the table at me, at my work pants, at the calluses on my hands, at the wire stripper clip I'd forgotten to take off my belt loop, and he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "You couldn't have dressed like an adult for one evening?" There was a pause, the kind that has weight in it. My aunt stopped pouring sweet tea. My cousin's fork hovered over her plate. My grandpa, who had been sitting at the far end of the table and hadn't said a word all night, set down his napkin very slowly. He looked at my dad, just looked at him, and then he said, quiet and even, "She looks fine, Richard." My dad said nothing after that, but the way he pressed his lips together, I'd seen that look before. It wasn't embarrassment. It was something older than embarrassment. I didn't understand it then. I filed it away the way you file away things that confuse you and hurt at the same time. Let me back up. I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee, not the downtown part where people go to hear live music and take photos of the murals. The part further out, where the roads go from pavement to gravel and the houses have big yards that nobody chose, that just ended up that way. My grandpa Earl had lived in that county his whole life. He built custom cabinetry and did residential electrical work out of a truck he'd owned since before I was born. He was the kind of man who knew every hardware store clerk by name and kept a tin of peppermint candies in his glove box. My dad, Richard, had grown up watching my grandpa come home with sawdust on his clothes and grease under his nails. And somewhere along the way, my dad had decided that wasn't going to be him. He went to college, he got a business degree. He married my mom, who taught piano lessons, and they moved to a neighborhood with a homeowners association and a sign at the entrance that had a little coat of arms on it. He became an insurance regional manager. He drove a Lexus. He said things like professional development at the dinner table the way other people say grace. He was proud of himself, and he was embarrassed of anything that reminded him of where he came from, which, eventually, included me. I was never supposed to be an electrician. My dad's plan, and he had a plan, the same way he had a 5-year work review schedule and a labeled filing cabinet, was that I would go to a 4-year university, major in business or communications, get a corporate job, and stop making him explain my choices at dinner parties. I tried. I really did. I spent a year and a half at Middle Tennessee State, sitting in a lecture hall with 200 other people, watching a professor read off slides I could have read myself, spending money I didn't have, accumulating debt that made me feel sick every time I opened my banking app. I wasn't failing, that was the thing. I was passing, I just felt like I was disappearing. The summer before my sophomore year, I went to stay with my grandpa for 6 weeks while my parents did a home renovation. He had a job rewiring an older farmhouse outside of town, and one afternoon, he just handed me a pair of lineman's pliers and showed me what to do. Not as a lesson, just because I was there, and he needed an extra set of hands. 3 hours later, I was up in a ceiling crawl space tracing a circuit that hadn't worked in 10 years, and I found the problem, a junction box someone had buried behind insulation in 1987, and when my grandpa climbed up to look at it, he said, "You've got good instincts." Nobody had ever said that to me about anything. I withdrew from MTSU in September. I enrolled in the apprenticeship program at the local IBEW. I called my dad on a Sunday afternoon and told him. He was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "So you're going to be a repairman?" I said, "I'm going to be an electrician." He said, "Same thing." We didn't talk much after that for about 4 months. My mom would call separately, always with that careful voice she used when she was trying to be neutral. She'd ask how I was doing, and I'd say fine, and she'd say good, and neither of us would say the part that was actually true. My dad came around eventually in the way that some fathers come around, not by apologizing or admitting anything, but by just resuming normal conversation as though the silence had been a weather event that had passed. He would ask at family gatherings vague questions about work, keeping busy, good money, not because he was proud of me, because asking was more comfortable than not asking. But I knew what he thought. You can know what someone thinks of you even when they're polite about it. It's in the way they don't mention you when they're bragging to other people. It's in the way they change the subject when someone asks what their daughter does for a living. It's in the way they look at you at a party, scanning from your shoes upward, doing a quick calculation in their head. I graduated my apprenticeship at 22, got my journeyman's license, went to work for a commercial electrical contractor in Nashville. The work was real: hospital renovations, school districts, an Amazon distribution center, a county courthouse, the kind of projects where if you wire something wrong, people notice. I was good, not bragging good, just I had good instincts, the way my grandpa said. I could walk into a space and see it in terms of load and circuit and panel capacity, the way some people walk into a room and just know where the furniture should go. My foreman, a man named Terrence, who had been doing this for 31 years and said less than any human being I'd ever met, told me twice that I had potential. For Terrence, that was a speech. By 25, I had my master electrician's license. I started doing side jobs on evenings and weekends. Residential stuff, mostly, referrals from neighbors, and then referrals from those neighbors, the organic growth that happens in trades when you do good work and you show up when you say you will. My dad came to exactly 0 of my license ceremonies. He congratulated me via text. One word, congrats. No punctuation. In the meantime, my brother, his name is Kevin, 2 years younger than me, the one who went to Vanderbilt and got a finance degree and then got a job at a wealth management firm in Brentwood. Kevin was the one my dad talked about at Christmas. Kevin's bonus. Kevin's firm. Kevin's girlfriend, who was now Kevin's fiancée. The engagement announced at that dinner at my uncle's house in front of 23 people. The night my dad looked at my belt loop and asked if I could dress like an adult. Kevin didn't do anything to make it worse. To be fair to him, he'd always been fine with me. He just existed in the lane our dad had laid out without seeming to notice that the lane had edges. After the engagement dinner, I drove back to Nashville and sat in my apartment and ate leftover Thai food and tried to figure out what exactly I was feeling. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was something more specific than that. It was the feeling of being made to shrink in a space where you have done nothing wrong, of being looked at like a problem. My grandpa called me the next morning. "Don't let him get in your head," he said. "Your father has opinions about a lot of things he doesn't understand." I asked him what that meant. He was quiet for a second. "There's some things I'll tell you someday," he said. "Not today, but someday." I let it go. I had learned, with my grandpa, that pressing him was like pressing on a door that wasn't ready to open. It would open when it opened. I started my own LLC when I was 27. Marsh Electrical. I used my grandpa's last name, which was technically also my middle name, the one nobody ever used. It started as just me in a van and a really good reputation in 3 zip codes. Within 8 months, I had 2 employees. Within a year, 4. We picked up a contract with a property management company that owned a portfolio of commercial properties across Middle Tennessee and Southern Kentucky. Routine maintenance, service calls, tenant improvements. Steady and unsexy, and exactly the kind of work that pays your bills and builds your credit and lets you hire good people. I worked a lot. I want to be honest about that. I didn't have much else. I dated here and there, nothing serious. I had a group of friends I'd see on occasional Sundays, backyard cookouts and trivia nights. But most of my energy went into the work, not because I was trying to prove something, but because the work was the one place where the feedback was immediate and real, and not filtered through someone else's idea of what success was supposed to look like. My grandpa would come visit me in Nashville a few times a year. He'd bring me things: a jar of honey from a neighbor who kept bees, a cast iron pan he'd found at an estate sale, a book he'd read and thought I'd like, He'd walk through whatever project I was working on and ask questions, real questions, not polite ones. He told me once, standing in the half-finished electrical room of a dental practice we were wiring, that he was prouder of me than he'd ever been of anyone. I said, "Even Dad?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Your father made different choices." There it was again. That door that wasn't ready to open. The project that changed everything was a mixed-use development in downtown Clarksville. 4 stories, retail on the ground floor, 42 residential units above, plus underground parking and a rooftop terrace. The general contractor was a firm out of Memphis that had been expanding into Middle Tennessee, and they put the electrical contract out to bid. I almost didn't bid it. It was bigger than anything we'd done. The scope was significant. We'd need to add crew, manage a longer schedule, deal with a level of coordination with other trades that I hadn't navigated at that scale before. My project manager, a meticulous woman named Sandra who had come from a large commercial firm and knew things I didn't, said, "Bid it. We're ready." So we did. We spent 2 weeks on the estimate. We went through every spec, every drawing, walked the site, talked to the GC's superintendent. We came in competitive. We got the contract. It was $2.3 million, the largest single contract Marsh Electrical had ever signed. I called my grandpa when I got the email. He said, "Well," long pause, "well, I did not call my dad. We broke ground in March. The job ran tight. It always does at that scale, but we hit our milestones. We had 11 crew on site by the peak of framing, and Sandra was in her element, and I was on site 4 days a week, doing the kind of managing that was mostly just being there and paying attention and making decisions quickly when something needed a decision." About 6 months in, the Clarksville Leaf Chronicle ran a piece on the development, new construction downtown, local businesses, the city's growth trajectory. They quoted the GC, they quoted the developer, and they quoted me by name, Cassidy Marsh, owner of Marsh Electrical, Clarksville native, IBEW trained, master electrician. They published it on a Thursday. My phone rang Saturday morning. Not my dad, my mom. She said, "Did you know your father's name is in that article?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "He and Kevin are investors in that development through a real estate investment group." I sat with that for a moment. My dad and my brother, the insurance executive and the wealth manager, had invested in the development that I had won the electrical contract on. They were going to profit, at least in part, from work that I was doing, from the company I had built, from the license I'd earned while my dad sent one-word congratulations texts. I didn't feel victorious. I want to be honest about that too. I felt something stranger than victory. I felt like a person who had been walking in the dark for a long time and had suddenly, without expecting it, walked into a room where all the lights were on. My dad called Sunday evening. He said, "I saw the article." I said, "Okay." He said, "The project looks good." I said, "It is good." He said, "I didn't know it was your company." I said, "You didn't ask." He was quiet. Then he said, "Your grandfather called me." I didn't know my grandpa had called him. I waited. My dad said he told me some things I should have, things I already knew, things I hadn't thought about in a long time. I asked him what things. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he'd changed his mind. Then he said, "My father, your grandpa, he didn't start out doing electrical work. He started out on a highway crew, road grading, in the 60s, before I was born. That's how he paid to go to trade school. That's how he got his license." I said nothing. His brother, your great-uncle who you never met, he had a construction company, small, residential. They built a lot of the original neighborhoods in that part of Clarksville. Before I was born, before I was in school, people in that town knew the Marsh name because of what they built. I said, "I know Grandpa was a tradesman. I thought you knew that I knew." He said, "That's not the point." Another pause. "The point is that I spent a long time, a very long time, acting like that history was something to get away from. I changed how I talked about it. I didn't bring you to see where your grandpa grew up. I didn't tell you who built the church we went to, or who poured the foundation for your elementary school. I let you think that work like that was lesser." He stopped. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say. He said, "Your grandfather told me that you named your company Marsh Electrical." I said, "Yeah." He said, "He told me that was the first time in a long time that someone in this family had carried that name into something they built." I had to put the phone down for a second. I set it on my kitchen counter and looked out the window at the parking lot of my apartment complex for a few seconds, and I took a breath, and I picked it back up. I said, "Dad?" He said, "I know. It wasn't an apology." Not exactly. It was more like a man acknowledging a long-standing debt without using the word debt. I didn't need the full speech. I had learned from my grandpa that some things open when they're ready. The development finished on time. It was January. The ribbon cutting was a Friday afternoon. The developer, the mayor, the GC superintendent, a few local aldermen, Sandra and I stood in the back and drank bad coffee out of paper cups and watched the speeches. My grandpa drove up from the county. He wore a white dress shirt and the same blazer he'd worn to my journeyman ceremony. He stood next to me and watched the building. This building, these 4 stories that we had lit from the inside out, that we had run wire through from sub-panel to service, that our crew had shown up to every morning in the cold. And he didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "Your great-uncle Eugene poured the foundation for the original building that stood on this lot, 1959. I looked at him. He said, "That one burned down in 71, long before you were born." He paused. "But the lot's the same." I thought about that, about what it means to build something on a piece of ground that your family has touched before, without knowing it, without planning it, just because you did the work and the work led you there. My dad came to the ribbon cutting. He stood about 15 feet away and he didn't approach me in the crowd. But when the ceremony ended and people started moving toward the catered lunch the developer had set up, he walked over to where I was standing with my grandpa. He put his hand on my shoulder. He looked at the building. He said, "It looks good." I said, "It is good." He nodded. He looked at his father, my grandpa, and something passed between them that I don't have a word for. The kind of thing that passes between people when a long silence finally ends. My brother sent me a text that night. Saw the finished project. "Seriously impressive, Cass. Proud of you." I believed him. I still do this work. Marsh Electrical has 16 employees now. We're bidding on a county school system contract that would be the largest thing we've ever done. 11 schools, phased over 3 years, roughly $4 million. Sandra thinks we'll get it. I think we'll get it too. My grandpa still brings me honey and cast iron pans when he visits. My dad asks real questions now, not polite ones. He asked me once how you calculate load capacity for a panel, and I spent 45 minutes explaining it, and he actually listened. I don't know if he understood all of it, but he listened. I still have that wire stripper clip. I still forget to take it off my belt loop sometimes, and I have never once apologized for that. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes for a person to change. Not perform change, not acknowledge wrongdoing in the careful way people do when they want credit for the acknowledgement, but actually shift. Actually look at something they've been carrying for 30 years and set it down. My dad didn't become a different person overnight. And I'm not going to pretend the phone call we had after the article ran erased everything that came before it. It didn't. There were years of dinners where I felt small. Years of one-word texts. Years of watching him light up talking about my brother's bonus while I sat across the table with calluses on my hands and a master electrician's license that I'd earned in a field he had decided, quietly, was beneath our family. But here's the thing I had to learn, and it took me longer than I'd like to admit. What my dad thought of my work was never actually about my work. It was about something he was running from. The irony is that the very thing he was ashamed of, where he came from, what the Marsh name used to mean in that county, was exactly what gave me the instincts to do what I do. My grandpa Earl put a pair of lineman's pliers in my hands one summer afternoon without ceremony, without a lesson plan, just because I was there and the work needed doing. And something in me recognized it. You can't fake that kind of recognition. That's the part nobody tells you about choosing a path your family doesn't approve of. They make it about status, about money, about what it looks like at a dinner party. But the real question is always simpler. Are you doing something real? Are you doing something that requires you to actually know what you're doing? Because that kind of work, the kind where the feedback is immediate, where you either wired it right or you didn't, where the panel either holds the load or it doesn't, that work has a way of building a person from the inside out in a way that no title and no corner office can replicate. I didn't become who I am despite my dad's disapproval. I became who I am partly because I had to decide early that his opinion wasn't the last word on the value of my choices. That's not bitterness, that's just the mechanism. When the people whose approval you most want withhold it, you have two options. You collapse toward what they want, or you go find out what you actually are. I chose the second one. It was lonely sometimes, but it was mine. What I didn't expect was that the work itself would eventually do what no argument could have done. Not to prove a point. I was never doing it to prove a point. But just because honest work, done well, over time accumulates into something undeniable. 16 employees, a $2.3 million contract, a company that carries my grandpa's name into buildings that will stand in that county for decades. That's not a victory speech, that's just what happens when you put your head down and do the thing you're actually built for. My grandpa told me once that the Marsh name used to mean something in Clarksville. I'm doing my best to make sure it means something again. Not for him, not for my dad, for the version of me that sat in that ceiling crawl space at 20 years old, tracing a circuit that hadn't worked in 10 years and felt for the first time in a long time exactly right.